Hello and welcome to another very special episode of the Colton O Mystery Show. And boy, do we have a fun one today. This is the third time I've recorded this one. I each time have been sending off a proof copy to my deep state handlers who, from the last episode, I disclosed to everybody that I've been given a couple big suitcases full of money and I am now currently shilling for the deep state. But it's a pretty sweet deal because all they've asked me to do is just tell the absolute truth, be really, really honest, play both sides out. Maybe they know all these things. Whatever their point is, they've asked me to tell the truth because they think that the truth is going to push people further away. So, sweet deal. I don't know what I'm going to spend it all on yet. I've been talking about a Lotus, but man, a bulletproof G-Wagon would be pretty cool. Who knows? But like I said, this is the third time I've recorded this podcast. And it was a hard one. It was a hard one because this one focuses today on our dear, dear president, Mr. Donald J. Trump. Probably the most polarizing figure since, Hitler was the first name to come to my mind, but I don't really like all these comparisons between Trump and Hitler because it's not really, but he's a very polarizing figure. People love him, people hate him. And the love and the hate is very, very strong on either side. And it seems like the smaller majority of folks are this middle-minded sort of take it day by day, separate the rhetoric from the outcomes kind of people. And those people tend to be like independent-minded libertarian people, or even like disaffected liberals who left the Democratic Party and are now kind of MAGA curious. There's a bunch of those too. And I'm starting to pick up on a pattern, and maybe this is as good a time of any in this podcast to say this, but it seems like I'm picking up on this pattern that people that are very cynical and jaded and tend to believe Donald Trump is some psychological operation put in by the deep state to maybe orchestrate some controlled demolition of the Democratic Party, to move people away from all that social justice thing, to distract everybody from the Occupy Wall Street era where they were trying to make it a class issue and get a hold of the bankers and stop a bailout and keep them from having their terrible mortgage practices that fucked everybody over. You know what I mean? Like, there was some sentiment of let's bring these big companies that have been selling out Americans, and not all billionaires do this. It's not like all the rich need to get their comeuppance, but there is definitely a difference in between rich people who make their money stepping on people and selling out the American people on the way up, and there's a difference between people who make a lot of money providing a valuable service to the American people. And we got to distinguish those two things in our minds. But those people who really look at things from, let's say, a conspiratorial point of view, who tend to approach things from a Unum Party perspective, those people tend to have been paying attention to politics for longer than, let's say, 2008 or something. You know, they've been paying attention for a very, very long time. And then there's this other category of folks who absolutely love Donald Trump, thinks he walks on water. They're real good about ignoring all the parts that, are a little less than admirable. Some of the parts where the rhetoric doesn't quite match the outcomes. They're the kind of people that ignore a lot of the things from the first term, including Project Warp Speed, and, some of these other things that, critics of Donald Trump who are being honest and not going straight to racist or Nazi or misogyn, not those bullshit arguments, the real arguments, they tend to ignore some of those. And I think those people who absolutely are just ride or die Donald Trump, those people, from what I'm starting to see and kind of glean from the situation all around, is that those people tend to have started paying attention to politics somewhere in between 2008 and 2012, between the big mortgage collapse, the Tea Party movement, this sort of populist uprising that came about in the right, and factions of the right started to break off, right? People that didn't want all these foreign wars and didn't want to be printing all this money. People who probably got impressed pretty well upon by, let's say, Ron Paul, folks like that, Those people tend to be ride or die Donald Trump because they believe Donald Trump is a response to a symptom, and that symptom is one that they also recognized and opposed. And then there's the third category of people that absolutely hate Donald Trump. Those people, from my understanding, tend to have started paying attention to politics in about 2016 when he ran. And that made them very vulnerable, not understanding the context of everything leading up to 2016. And there kind of lays out our three big lanes of perspective: the PsyOp, the Savior, and Satan. And that's kind of the framework we're going to be working with today. In fact, that is the title: T45, T47, Satan, Savior, or PsyOp. And it's kind of obvious why we should be talking about this. I mean, he is the president, and we are sort of the most consequential and influential country in the world right now. And so it bears weight just about on everybody on the planet's lives, but definitely yours and mine. And the news is happening at a faster rate than it's ever happened before, and politics is now pop culture. And since politics is pop culture, that means there's a bunch of people involved in the conversation who aren't quite, I won't even say experts, because you don't need to be an expert, but just having had paid attention for, some reasonable amount of time, enough to see the greater context of what's led up to 2016, where we were coming from. And if you can bolster your historical knowledge and go all the way back to like 1963, that's a good date to know things up until, and then maybe even pre-World War I or up until the Federal Reserve. If you know all of that history from 1913 or so, maybe 1917 all the way up until now, then you're going to be a little bit better informed. So the question we're going to ask today is, which one of these categories does our dear president fall into? Or is it a blend of a couple of them? Now, instead of just telling you what I think and then going from there, I think the best thing to do, maybe so you have it laid out in your mind, is to kind of organize this in a geometrical fashion, or like a flow chart, or like a decision tree in your mind, right? And to do that, I think we need to just start asking ourselves a few questions and think from first principles and sort of decide on the way up what's least possible, what's most possible, what has the most evidence and the best case for it. So if you love Trump, you're probably going to hate this. If you hate Trump, you're probably going to hate this. And if you're of the category of people that just doesn't trust anybody anymore and is completely politically jaded and tends to think that all the world is a stage, well, you're probably going to hate this one too, because I don't know. I'm trying my absolute best to dig up the truth here, and I usually know I'm onto something fairly truthful when it's complex, hard to understand, and not clearly defined, especially when it's something like this. So, all right, the first question we need to ask ourselves. Oh, sorry. I do have a word from our sponsors today, and that word is destitution. They want me to talk about the word destitution because it is what all of us will be if we don't embrace and love and accept the AI. If you don't accept the AI technology, I'm told destitution is what will come. So if you're that person that's in law school right now taking out big loans, just know that you will be destitute because you will not be able to pay those loans back here in the future. Because we're not going to need lawyers anymore. Knowledge-based workers are going away first. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, so what do we need to establish first? Can you and I agree that things were not good before 2016? If that's like, oh yeah, duh, maybe you can go ahead and skip ahead 10 minutes or so, but maybe not. Maybe if you'd want to also lay this argument out to somebody else, it's worth sticking with me on this. But let's just talk about this, because I think most of us are on the same page, and this one's going to be pretty easy. Can we establish that things leading up to 2016 were not so good? The big picture trends, what was going on at the time? And I've done a lot of my digging and research and compiling through X. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, X is Elon Musk's platform, and Elon loves Trump, and he's sucking on his toes. So how are we going to trust Grok? Grok can't give us the right answers. Well, I think you're going to be surprised at just how honest and fair grok was during all this. So big picture trends from 1989 to 2017. Purchasing power declined big time. It declined or stagnated for the average worker. Real median wages grew just 0.2% annually to 2016, per the Bureau of Labor Statistics, while productivity soared. Gains went to the top. CEO pay jumped 937%, almost 1,000% increase for CEO pay. And workers lost ground to rising costs. Housing is up 50%, healthcare up 100%, and more. Inflation was a real thing. Through this whole period of time from 89 to 2017, we are bombing tons of other countries. We're toppling other governments. We're making the world safe for oil markets and cheap energy here. And the CIA is running all sorts of covert operations all across the world. And all of that costs money. Maybe not the CIA black budget stuff. They sell drugs and make their own money to pay for their shit. But all this USAID stuff that we have now, all that bombing in Kosovo, all that shit going down in Serbia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq again, Kuwait, all these places. That all costs money. And the way most of that gets paid for, especially when the government is operating at a budget deficit, is by printing more money. And when you print more money and artificially add it to the supply, it's like a very duh thing, but you're going to inflate the currency. And since we've been living on credit pretty much for a while, and that credit is, that our credit card as a country is pretty much a money printer. And when they print the money, it goes to the people at the top, it goes to these big companies, it goes to bailouts, it goes to pay military contractors. And when they use that freshly printed money, it's still worth a little bit because it hasn't been inundated into the money supply already. It's still just in the hands of a few, and so it still retains some of its value, but by the time it trickles through all those people and the contractors at the military place spend it and they invest it and it goes and then ends up in Dollar General somewhere, you know what I mean? By the time it gets there, it's highly inflated, and we all feel the effects of that. Inflation was a real son of a bitch at this time from 1989 to 27. And it averaged 2.5% to 3%, which is tame by historical standards, but felt inflation hit a lot harder and eroded the real buying power of things. So like the stock market kind of kept track with these things, but the inflation for everybody else, and when it hits our pockets at the lowest of level for daily expenses, it gets pretty bad. Interest rates fell from 9 to 0, a boon for debt, but a bust for savings. That's no good. If you're saving anything, the bank's not paying you to keep it there. They're incentivizing you to not save it and to spend it. The Fed propped up markets, but not paychecks. Fuel prices were crazy and swung from $1 to $4 adjusted during this period of time, peaking under Bush Jr. and easing under Obama. A constant budget wild card. And job quality. Manufacturing shed 5 million jobs from 17 million to 12 million. Service and tech jobs replaced them. This is the knowledge-based work we were talking about. And this all comes from NAFTA. And NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, on its surface was to allow free trade between all of the countries of North America and to make things a better business environment for everybody else. But what the big companies saw that as is, okay, there's no penalty for me to move my operation making cabinets or whatever to Mexico. And my family worked in a business building laboratories and doing contracting construction sort of stuff, but building scientific laboratories and using a particular kind of scientific cabinet or whatever from this company called Hamilton. And Hamilton, back in the day, sometime in NAFTA, moved their operation to Mexico and very soon went under and went out of business because they could not deal with the cartels there. But they made a short-term gains decision, something that would affect the bottom line right now and increase profits right now with not much forward thinking. And it was the cartels that got them. But eventually, when you move all your manufacturing out of the country, what happens is jobs start to go away. And the idea was to move them to knowledge-based work. But eventually, if you run this situation long enough where companies leave for short-term gains, eventually there's nobody in America with enough money to purchase those products. So the companies are going to end up losing money in the long term anyway. And what they don't realize is that investing in the long term into the workforce here means you'll always have a consumer base to buy your shit. But a lot of times these companies aren't really selling direct to consumer here, and they don't really feel it in the short term. And, the CEO and C-suite and board of directors of these companies probably will never feel it. The company will just go bankrupt and they'll keep all their money, and then everybody will lose their jobs, and it doesn't really affect them. They'll just go on to the next. This is sort of the environment for the economy, for business, for the average worker between 1989 and 2017. Under Bush Sr., recession pinched, stable basics, but dimming prospects. Clinton, there's a boom, the master split, the techies won, and the factory hands lost. Bush Jr., the crashes book-ended pain, and fuel and housing ate savings because prices are going up. All these wars were going on. And then during the Obama era, we have a slow heal, the scars lingered, low wages and high debts, and then we're leading up under all of this pressure on the common person up into 2016. Their purchase power is eroding, the dollar sucks, the economy is getting worse, and on top of that, while everybody's getting poorer, it seems like all of our political establishment is focusing on all of these social issues and banning words and making sure we're protecting people's feelings and doing all of these things that feel very good to people who don't think about things very much and don't think about the consequences of certain policies. We're entering this era in which the diving boards all go away. Everything gets nerfed. Participation trophies are getting handed out. The coddling of the American with all this dumb social bullshit, if I'm being honest. Not all of it is bullshit. Civil rights are a real topic and a real thing, but by and large, so much of this was a distraction to keep us from the real issues at hand. If they can keep us all fighting amongst each other over all of these, social things and keep us from just fucking leaving each other alone, then we're not going to be focusing on them. We're not focusing on the tech investment bank class that gives out a bunch of subprime mortgages and then goes defunct and then asks the government for a bunch of money. We're not so mad about that if we're all at each other's throats over gender ideology or over fucking pronouns or, and in the grand scheme of things, I know this sounds mean and I know this sounds heartless, but in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't really matter. I know it matters to some people and it should, but asking the government to intervene on behalf of you, I don't know, for what? Civil rights do need to be protected, and we have civil rights that are protected, but all this DEI shit that's come about, it's just not that. I don't know. I'm ranting on all this, but that's kind of the point. Up to 2016, people are being force-fed this and told they need to care about this, but really they've been getting poorer this whole time, poorer and poorer. Jobs are going away. It sucked. So I don't know how much more evidence you need. Maybe go read a fucking book or go listen to a couple podcasts and figure out for yourself that things were not very good leading up until 2016, but that Americans, by and large, were under a trance and were in this sort of days where everything felt right and you can still trust the government kind of to a degree, but the cracks were starting to show. The cracks were starting to show for sure. Okay, so if we're in agreement at this point, and you also acknowledge that things were not very good leading up to 2016, then we can move on to this next step. If you don't agree with that, then pull the parachute, jump out now, because this podcast ain't for you. But maybe you just listen a little longer and hate listen to it. Or, maybe you just like me and my charming personality, so you'll just stick around. But if you're going to stick around, point number 2, or question number 2 that we need to ask ourselves is, can we establish that there was no difference between Bush, Papa Bush, Clinton, Baby Bush, and Obama? Clintabushama, which is the name of an ancient demon from the 6th layer of hell, and it's actually the thing that inhabits the skin suits of all 4 of these characters. It's an ancient demon, and it will probably never die. Now let's take a look at that list carefully, though. And I'm being sort of facetious. I'm half kidding when I say it is a demon that inhabits all 4 of these, what we know of as people. I'm half serious when I say that. But the reason I say that and the reason it's half true is because you've got Daddy Bush, pretty hardcore Republican, neocon, warmonger, was there on the grassy knoll the day that JFK got shot. He was there in Dallas, my friends. He was there in Dallas. And the Bushes are like very well connected to some of these big families you know of, the Rothschilds, the people that come out of that old northeastern New England money. I think they're actually from Connecticut. And then for a political stunt, moved to Texas so they could be charming Southern gentlemen. But that's not really true. These are skull and bones people. These are very well connected people. These are old money family. I'm pretty sure the Bushes are connected, or not just connected, related to the House of Windsor, which is the royal family in England. Interesting to note there. So you got Papa Bush, warmonger, Republican, pretty much your stereotypical Republican when we look back at it. And then you've got, right after that, Bill Clinton. And personality-wise, I mean, very, very different people. Americans felt like they were getting something very different when they switched from Papa Bush to Clinton. But what's so funny is the outcomes were nearly the same, pretty much exactly the same. And maybe there was a little give and take so that there could be the semblance of things being different, but the wars, the bombings, the CIA coups, the degradation of the American worker and the American dollar, all of these things continued from one to the other. Papa Bush wrote up NAFTA and Clinton signed it into office. There was no disagreement on that, you know? Obama said one thing when he ran, and then once he ended up in that presidency, he ended up intensifying multiple conflicts that were started by George Bush Jr. You see what I mean? If you go between this Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, if you erase the names and you like redact all that and just have like a list of outcomes and policies and things that came about during that era, unless you were really good with dates, you wouldn't know who did what. You know, unless you're really good with these policies and you studied it really well, you probably wouldn't be able to label which one was which. And that's an interesting thing, right? Because on the surface, Papa Bush is very different from Clinton, and Clinton is very different from Baby Bush. And Papa Bush can't be any fucking further in our minds and like our image from Obama, right? Those are two very different people, right? Right? And so this is how you get into the uniparty style theory. And my favorite person to listen to when it comes to this theory, because I think they probably make the most cogent argument and they are just very well versed and well respected. And, you know, I've never caught them lying. I've never caught them shading the truth. I've heard of them correcting themselves, and it's somebody who I reference a lot, Mr. Hotep Jesus. Hotep Jesus is probably one of the bigger, better proponents of this uniparty theory. And he does a good job of laying it out. You can go check some of that out. But all right, can we establish that these were all the same people? So how do we do that? Well, let's look at the outcomes. The outcomes were all war. The outcomes were all the degradation of the American people, the inflation of the dollar, toppling of other governments all across the world, the fraudulent spending of U.S. aid in other places to facilitate influence campaigns in these places, which most of the time does not really get to the people who need it in the form of aid. It goes to paying off the people who run the country. So you have an in with them, right? So your business people have a point of contact so they can get in there and start investing American dollars in whatever country you're living in. I didn't want to say shithole country, but so we're at this point now. Can we establish that there is no difference between all of these people coming into it? Now, why might that be? Is it really that all four of these presidents were scam artists and all puppets on strings? Maybe. But I think if we're being honest, the best puppet is one that doesn't really know he's a puppet, right? Somebody who knows they're a puppet has to be an actor, and they have to act. They have to keep a facade going on. They have to keep something about them. And maybe they're doing that because all of these presidents did age like shit, you know? Seems like Donald Trump's the only one that hasn't really aged like that. Like Obama looked a lot older when he was done. Clinton looked a lot older when he was done. Both of the Bushes, it looked just like their soul was sucked out of them by the end of it. And so maybe they're acting, maybe they were acting, maybe that's what wrote them so hard, but I don't know. That just seems too hard. Too hard. So the uniparty theory is there, but it wouldn't be all Republicans and all Democrats are in on the game. It'd be a few people are in on the game, and there's a bunch of other unwitting stooges. There's also this phenomenon called institutional continuity. And that's where presidents inherit the same old bureaucracy, the Pentagon, the Fed, intelligence agencies, whose priorities are stability, profit, control, don't shift very much. Campaign rhetoric changes, policy doesn't. Because there is this big, unelected, bureaucratic, three-letter agency-driven HR world of agencies that kind of run things and keep a status quo, and these agencies sort of have a mind of their own, and they have like a sense of self-preservation at this point, Like if there's an agency that's ordained and created to solve a particular problem, they don't really have a motive to solve the problem, because if you do, then the budget numbers come down or the agency completely disbands when the problem is solved. What happens more often than not is non-governmental organizations, charities, nonprofits, and these three-letter agencies, bureaucracies in general, often exacerbate the issue so that they have something to do. And so they've got a reason to write grants, and they've got a reason to keep the staff that they've got and keep the bonuses that they have coming in, Institutional continuity. The Bushes and Clinton and Obama, Clintabushama, could have had some of this going on. Could have had a little bit of that. And they bent to the will of it and realized that they aren't really in control altogether. Maybe. But I don't know. I think Papa Bush is definitely one of those guys who's in on it. I think maybe Clinton knew enough and didn't really want to ask questions. I think Obama knows more than we think. Baby Bush, he seems more like the classic kind of puppet. Or maybe he just played dumb the whole time and he's really smart. Who knows? But I don't know. We're at another one of these points in the video where pull the parachute. If you don't think I'm right about this, if you can't acknowledge or see that there really wasn't much difference between Republicans and Democrats for this span of time, and we could probably push that window back a little further and keep it true, but I'm trying to keep it into a period of time where it's relevant to all of us right now and a little easier to understand. Another thing to think about, and this is going to come into play in a few minutes, is the donor class. The donor class donating to the campaigns of all four of these presidents, very, very similar. It's one of those follow the money things, right? So if the outcomes are all the same, if we keep doing the same sort of things, if everything seems to be running as status quo and in the same direction, which is down for the American people, then I don't know, it might be safe to assume that there's not much difference between these people. That the uniparty, that the institutional continuity might really be in control at this point in American history. Okay, so if you're still here, great, because now we're getting into the really fun stuff, and this is where things get a little more squirrely and a little harder to prove. Hi, have you lost loved ones to any number of psychological operations? Have they completely flipped a lid over climate change, gender, or Tiger King? Are they ruining family gatherings, even phone calls? A recent study from the Psychological Warfare Division of Disney shows that 1 out of 5 Americans currently has a life-debilitating mind virus, programmed in by a number of entities, foreign and domestic. This is why you need the kind family folks over at Mental Lemonade, LLC. Everyone already knows these guys. They're America's darling tech family, and out with a new product proven to delete whole sections of opinion and non-cohesive parts of the personality. Just get them talking about the most incessant PsyOps, put them close to a TV or computer, and play the personalized video. And soon, and boom, boom, subconscious wiped. To them, it just seems like a 2-minute video of something they care very deeply about. But hidden inside the flicker rate are coded messages proven to reset the more loathsome opinions from the grumpiest of your family members. Go to mentalemonade.co.rus today for a free trial.
Warning, do not look directly at the screen if the video is not intended for you. It will wipe your mind of random memories and tastes without any recognizable pattern. Some results may vary. PsyOps generated by the Mossad and Disney have a small chance to turn users into a Manchurian-style candidate.
Okay, the next question we have to ask ourselves is, can we make a case for the idea that Trump is a genuine breakaway from that uniparty structure? Is he different? Is one of these things really not like the others? Is he different from Clint Abu Shama? Is he different? Or is it the same demon in a new skin suit? Let's talk about it. Because if we're really approaching this scientifically, most of what we have to go off is the first term. And if anybody who's being honest, and there's a lot of things that Donald Trump does that I do like, and I do like that he is raging against the establishment, and I do like that feels like the cat is getting out of the bag in some ways, but I think anybody that's being honest can say that the first term was a fucking disaster. Now, why it was a disaster is important for this, but I think most of us can agree it was sort of a disaster and didn't really go according to plan. I mean, maybe it ended up being a net neutral, but it was a disaster relative to the promises that were given and to like the belief that everybody who voted for him had in what was going on, right? Because things started out hot. They really did. And he did keep a couple promises about no new wars, right? And Donald Trump not starting any new wars means, well, all right, so he was the first president in a very, very long time. And I think my lifetime, and if you're 40, your lifetime, no new wars. First president in that whole period of time, in 40 years, maybe more. Not exactly sure. I probably should have got that number. But that is something that the Trump people always talk about, which is a break from the pattern. He didn't launch an Iraq or Libya-style invasion, which is a point that all of his supporters tout as proof that he's an outsider. But if we're being super honest, he wasn't exactly a peacenik. He escalated drone strikes more in his first 4 years than Obama's 8. And that's per Air War's estimate. He kept troops in Afghanistan and Syria and nearly sparked that conflict with Iran when he drone striked that dude Soleimani, and he died like a dog, shot him down with a drone. That almost went bad. So there was a little towing of the line there. Our defense spending that in that 4-term period, also a 4-year term, hit $738 billion in 2020, which was a record at the time. I think maybe the Ukrainian budget for 2024 might have exceeded that. I believe it exceeded that. So what are we saying here on the militarism thing? Is it the same or is it different? Well, I think having Hillary Clinton in there and all of her record in the Obama administration with Benghazi, with Libya, as Secretary of State with like destabilizing the Middle East, I think she would have been the golden ticket to a greater war with Iran. Now, that doesn't exonerate Trump from doing these things, and in a perfect world, most of us wish he would have put his foot down and said, no more drone strikes, no more bombings. This guy Soleimani's not a problem. And definitely don't spend all this money in other places, right? And defense spending is different from like Ukraine's defense spending. You know what I mean? Like giving just weapons and shit to Ukraine is very different from like investing in your own military. It's not, I guess military contractors and Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin and all these fucking people, the war machine are still getting the money, but at least we're not destabilizing other regions with it, but I guess we kind of were at the time with these drone strikes. So I don't know. This is like a 50-50 because new wars and escalating what we were doing there was definitely the agenda of what was going on. We're looking at an exponential curve all the way up until Trump, and then like the militarism curve kind of peters off and stays flat. And I'm not saying it goes down. That's obvious here. It didn't go down, but it stayed flat. And I don't think flat was part of the military-industrial complex's plan. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't, though. I'm kind of leaning towards no. What I'm thinking this is evidence of is that continuity, that institutional continuity we were talking about earlier, and sort of a little bit more of the uniparty theory, in that there is this uniparty war machine thing that doesn't really have an R&D red or blue tie on it. It just kind of operates. And maybe they were the ones putting the pressure to send the drone strikes and to make it seem like it's a matter of national security. And you don't want the embarrassment of this on your first term. It'll really mar things if we let this happen and a terror attack happens here. The Democrats will never let you live it down. I can see Donald Trump succumbing to some of those things, just given what we know about his personality. I don't know. All right, so there's militarism. It seems 50-50 and kind of gray in my mind there. But what about economic trends, right? Let's talk about Trump's record. So pre-COVID, unemployment dropped to 3.5% in 2019, and manufacturing jobs ticked up slightly. About 400,000 added by 2019, which is no small number. 400,000 manufacturing jobs is a really big deal. That's a lot of work to be bringing back into America, and that, is the first time it happened in a long time, though it was still very far below the 1990s levels, which I think was part of the platform promise, was to bring manufacturing back and to get us to that same golden era that Trump often hearkened to. The tax cuts passed in 2017 heavily favored corporations and the rich, echoing Bush Jr.'s trade wars with China and renegotiating NAFTA into USMCA aimed to bring jobs back, but the results were mixed. Manufacturing growth stalled by 2019. But I think stalling by 2019 has more to do with COVID and the impending doom and disaster that was going on, and people not wanting to invest their money when they're unsure of the future, especially building new manufacturing plants, which is a huge undertaking, probably can't be done during a pandemic. Post-COVID, of course, the economy tanked. And though the stimulus checks were a populist twist, we're looking at another gray area. The $1,200 to the people wasn't necessarily, it was good for the short term. It made people feel good at that time. I know a lot of people who just went and spent it on bullshit, But long term, that money was all printed. The money to pay for Operation Warp Speed was printed. The money during this time to pay for the wars was all printed, And so even though there was this huge push to bring manufacturing jobs back, we did print a lot of money in the process. And there was a huge upward transfer of wealth during the COVID era up to the pharmaceutical industries, up to big businesses. A lot of small businesses got choked out. A lot of small restaurants, businesses, boutiques, shops all got closed down. Small service businesses got closed down. Mom and pop stuff. But the big people, the big companies could still operate. They've got more cash. They've got more liquidity. They get more to throw around, more leverage. And they've got lawyers and money to operate within the crazy legal system and all the new regulations that come around with work in the COVID era. You see what I mean? And I've heard Donald Trump say this thing that it's okay to go into more debt as long as your growth outpaces your debt. If you're making more money than it's like the idea of going to buy a mortgage or get a mortgage on a house, and that mortgage, let's say, costs $1,000. And you plan to spruce it up a little bit and rent it out for $1,300, right? It's okay to take the debt out on that house to some degree because you're going to be cash flow positive on it, So you're going to own something. It's going to be an asset. It's going to be an asset on your balance sheet. You're worth that much more. You've got that much more leverage once you build some equity into it. And it's okay that you're in some debt because your growth and your revenue is outpacing that. And that's been Donald Trump's idea since the beginning, is to bring manufacturing back, bring the job base back here, and increase our productivity to the point where the productivity outpaces the debt and the printing of the money, which is a kind of a dangerous game to be. I'm not a financial expert or an economist, but I do know some of this, and I know where to go find information from people who do know. And most people think this is kind of a dangerous game to be playing. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It definitely was an administration in the first term that made moves, very bold moves, big moves, to try to bring manufacturing back and benefit the American worker. But the results were kind of mixed. Now you can blame some of this on the uniparty. You can blame some of this on that institutional continuity, that unelected bureaucracy that hangs out and pretty much threw a mutiny on Donald Trump for the first term. You can blame that, but maybe there's some other factors at play there for sure. But to his credit, bringing back all that manufacturing, cutting regulation, and cutting taxes for the wealthy, what that also means is that the people who have the money to build a new factory aren't going to be taxed as much, so that now they have an incentive to come here. And when they build that factory and have a little bit of a tax shelter from this new deal, they create what, 10,000 jobs in that new factory? And if the factory is running well and making a profit, those people there are probably going to have some pretty good jobs, and it'll probably be a unionized job, especially if it's an auto company or some sort of manufacturing. A lot of these places are unionized now. So it'd probably be a pretty decent job. You see what I mean? So tax cuts for the rich are not always what they sound like. Tax cuts for the rich are often intended as an incentive to bring business into America. Now, there is a difference between having tax shelters and tax cuts for people who just trade stocks all day and make money off of interest and do things that, ship out manufacturing or degrade the American worker. And then there are those who don't do that, who actually create good jobs here in America and provide something of service. There's a difference between those. And you see how gray all this is getting? Like, you want to make rich people pay their fair share, but you also don't want to disincentivize rich people from starting new businesses and creating new jobs, because then they'll just move their money off to another country somewhere and invest it in other places. And then the problem worsens here. Eventually, nobody here will have a job. Everybody will be moved to a knowledge-based job or some service-based job. And the first jobs that AI are going to get rid of are knowledge-based jobs and like menial service-based jobs. Probably my job in the next 3 years. And I inspect roofs, and that's probably going to be done by a drone very soon. If you're a lawyer, fuck you. Go fuck. It sucks. I'm sorry. If you're somebody that reads like medical charts from some sort of like radiology or MRI machine. Like, I know there's a bunch of people out there that do remote jobs where all they do is look at charts from like MRI machines or some other kind of medical scanning thing, but you think a human is going to need to be there soon? These AI programs are way better at spotting cancers and tumors and all kinds of maladies way faster than people are. So all that shit's going away. A bunch of people's jobs are going away. The first ones are going to be knowledge-based. And when that happens, there's not going to be a lot of money here. There's not going to be a lot of consumer stuff here. That was a long tangent. I hope it helped a little bit and gave you some information. But all right, so is Trump a breakaway? Third and final point here. Let's talk about the bankers and the elites. He railed against Wall Street on the campaign trail, but staffed his administration with Goldman Sachs alumni, which was Mnuchin and Cohn. Deregulation, like rolling back Dodd-Frank, kept finance happy. His personal wealth and real estate ties tied him to a very different elite circle, however. A lot less old money bankers and more nouveau riche loyalists, people who had just made their money in this generation. They weren't given it. They don't come from fucking Ivy League schools or elite circles or from the Council of Foreign Relations or Davos crowd or the Skull and Bones Society. He was cozy with wealthy people, but less institutionally wealthy people. People that were kind of more like renegades and rogues, people that kind of run in the same circles as he does. Because if you remember, Donald Trump is not really somebody that's that got accepted with the old school style people. I mean, he was kind of always a man of the people, and I think because his family's not really all that old of money, you know what I mean? To all these old Londonites and people who are third generation and are the nephew of the Duke of Sussex or whatever, like Donald Trump's just a second generation wealthy dude from New York who, went to the Wharton School, I guess, but it's kind of a blowhard and is definitely new money. Doesn't have the same class. I mean, makes everything gold. What the fuck? Like, how trashy is that? That's kind of like Donald Trump going up to this point. So you can see why he wouldn't have those people. And then his donor class is also very, very different. His donor class is less about those old elite style and more of a new crowd of people, which does fuel the different narrative. But the banks weren't broken up still, you know, even though these were a bunch of self-made tycoons. The system didn't fully and fundamentally change, but things were shaken up in a really big way. So I don't know, this all looks really gray to me too. So in my mind, there's really two different ways we can go here. So let's talk about and go back to the first three perspectives that we were talking about earlier. The PsyOp, Satan, and the Savior. So the first one, I think, the first worldview I think I want to look at here is the Satan worldview. And it's the one that I have the greatest suspicion that it is the most uninformed. I hate to say it. I hate to even be so decisive about something like that, but there are some things you just like have to take a stand on. I think I do know enough to say definitively that the folks who look at Donald Trump as the Satan and end of the world and the person who got elected because of racism and bigotry and misogyny and ignorance, those people, I believe, have the most uninformed worldview of those people. And I think that maybe correlates with them becoming politically aware in this political pop culture kind of sense in 2016. And the argument behind it, and this is why it's so senseless, because any of the real argument starts to move over to this like PsyOp argument. Like all of these arguments that like, oh, he is a characteristically and uniquely evil person, more evil than the Bushes, Clinton, Obama, all that. I don't see that. I really do not see that. I mean, if we're talking about him being a poon hound and saying he's going to grab him by the pussy and all, I mean, let's just be honest with ourselves. That was a short clip taken out of context in something. And if you're a dude, you've probably said something very similar to that. And you can say you haven't and you won't. And if you haven't, then I just don't think you really have fun. You know what I mean? And if there's any chicks that watch this or any of my lady friends watching this and see that, I'm probably not going to be friends with them. They probably won't want to be friends with me anymore. But let's just be honest. Girls are gross. Guys are gross. We're gross when we're around each other and talking about other people. People get horny, you know? People get all horned up and say gross things all the time. And I'm sure rich people do too. I'm sure rich people do too. But it doesn't seem like Trump was a part of this Epstein ring. It doesn't seem like he was like hanging out on Epstein Island so much. He did fly in the plane. He was business associates with Epstein for a little while, but that relationship got really shaky at a particular point, you know? So I don't know. It doesn't seem like he's running with those like satanic kind of people, but is he a perfect person? Absolutely not. I mean, he's got multiple kids with multiple wives. He's divorced a couple, married a really young Russian model, you know? It's like, he's kind of a poon hound. I mean, if we're talking about it, and this is a Joe Rogan quote, and he might have been quoting somebody else, but I've heard it on his show a couple of times. You can have two kinds of presidents. You can have warmongers and poon hounds. And between the two, you'd rather a poon hound because you know where their interests and motivations lie, and at least it's not mass death. I think I'd rather him be talking about grabbing people by the pussy than talking about genocide very casually, you know? I think I'd rather that. I think I would rather that. So what else does that worldview consist of? That worldview also consists of the idea that Trump is like a white nationalist, white supremacist, and a racist. And anybody from New York knows that's not true. Trump was the darling of the liberal left for a long time, was like the hero of the black worker in New York. I mean, Trump's kind of been like boys with the black population, especially in New York. You know what I mean? He came across as one of those elites who was willing to give back and come by and give out sweet tips to people, ask people who are bellhops and valets how they're doing. It's not something typical you see with people like that. And it might not even be genuine. It could be that Trump is just, he really likes to be liked and he'll fake it so in that it benefits him and people love him and people want to help him. Could be fake, but you can start doing the right things for the wrong reasons and then find the right reasons along the way. I don't think it's your place or my place to try to get into his head and figure out the intentions on why he was a good person. And if he was being a good person for malintent, like, okay, whatever. We can maybe make a guess one way or the other, but I don't think it helps us get to this point where we can decide if he's Savior, Satan, or PsyOp. But the Satan thing just all falls apart. And you can tell because the criticisms of it are just unfounded and silly, and like that this one that Elon is actually the president. He's got more power than Trump, and Trump's given up. Like, no. Doge makes suggestions. Trump makes decisions. I don't get that. That he's a racist, I don't get. No. That he's a sexist, I mean, not any more than any other boomer that age that has that amount of money. I mean, fuck, like, think about yourself. Like, if you really don't think that you growing up in that same situation and living the same life would probably do the same things, and you just don't know yourself well enough. You can say you won't because you think you're a really good person, but in all honesty, you're probably not. You're probably just as good as me and everybody else. You're probably a mixed bag like everybody else. And if everybody on earth knew everything you did and could look into your life and like know the things that you're ashamed of, you'd probably look like a giant asshole to everybody on the planet. So like, just fucking chill on that. I think the worldview that is the stupidest and the least informed is this one that Trump is Satan. It ignores that the 4 presidents before him were of different parties and acted the exact same, and that all of those people now hate him. You know what I mean? It ignores the idea that shit was bad up until 2016. And a lot of it is like this accusatory thing about the deplorables and how all these people are just racist and misogynist, and that's why we got Trump the first time and the second time, right? Because he beat a woman both times. I just don't feel it. All of that ignores what the American worker was feeling up until that point. And the American worker felt like there was a referendum on the system, and Donald Trump was that referendum. That's why he got elected twice. Whether you like it or not, it's probably the closest thing to the absolute truth here. We're probably up in the 90% accurate on that statement. So that worldview, I think we can eliminate. So now let's talk about these two. Trump being the savior of the new America and making it great again, or a Trojan horse psyop sent in by the lizards to destroy things from within and to destroy the Democratic Party and any sense of liberal ideas. Well, I don't know. That kind of presumes that the liberals in this country represent liberal ideas, and they really don't. They represent communist ideas. They represent Bolshevism, maybe even to some degree fascism. Some kind of weird super friends version, like all those 4 kids uniting their ring, and then some Captain Planet communist creature comes crawling out. That was a strange rant. I don't know where my brain went for that, but okay, we're dealing with these 2 possibilities now. The PsyOp and the Savior. And I'm thinking, based on all of this information, that if you want to give all of the credit and give the benefit of the doubt totally to Trump, here's what you would say, and here's the Steelman case for the benefit of the doubt. That Trump came in with all of his personality flaws that you and I are both completely aware of. A little bit of egotism, some arrogance. There's like this boomer mentality that I got to this position solely on my capabilities and how awesome of a person I am. And if you don't get to this point, then, it's kind of because you didn't try so hard. I mean, I've had people in my family kind of speak to me like that before. Not so much anymore. But it kind of just ignores that things were like way easier in the 50s and 60s and 70s to make a career, to save a pension, to buy a house, all that shit, There's all of that. And I can see Donald Trump coming into the presidency, getting elected, being like, oh shit, I got elected. I didn't really think this was going to happen. Now I have to be president and do something. And that arrogance led him to believe that it was just like steering a cruise ship away from a reef or away from the land. And all he had to do was get up there and turn the wheel, tell the guy to slow down a little bit, or him just pull the lever himself. But Once he got in, he realized that there was a giant crew of thousands of people that it takes to run this ship, and that one person at the helm doesn't really do it all. And if half of your crew is mutinying against you, you really aren't going to be able to steer that ship away from the reef. In fact, you might steer closer to it. They might go full steam ahead and start shoveling coal into the boilers and push that baby on. Let's make 10 knots going towards that reef. Fuck it. So if you're giving him the benefit of the doubt, this uniparty, institutional continuity, unelected bureaucracy sabotaged his first campaign, led him astray. The lizards got into the cabinet and led him one way or the other and told him that, oh, this is a really complex thing and you're going to do this and this and this. And he didn't have the right people around him. And by the time he figured it out that he was surrounded by swamp creatures that he put into his own cabinet, it was too late. COVID had just hit, a bioweapon gets released on the world, and your hands are kind of tied because at first we don't really know what COVID was going to be. That first month, couple weeks was kind of scary, because everybody who really pays attention knew it was a bioweapon. And if you knew it was a bioweapon up front and not just some naturally occurring disease, that's a lot scarier than there just being some novel virus that gets created, or that gets born into some natural circumstance. Bioweapons are a lot scarier. And so you probably would want to shut down the economy. You probably would want to rush a vaccine to market because that's the only way you can open back up the economy. And you really want to end things on a good term. And you were pushing to make the economy a lot better. I can see all of that happening. And the truth is probably to some degree that happened a lot. I think Trump was arrogant and thought he could do a lot more than he did. And it turned out it was a lot more complex of a system. And the onus is probably on him. Some of that responsibility and accountability is on him for not really having a good enough idea of what he was going to be up against. The degree of evil that he would be up against, the degree of insurrection and evil and treasonous behavior. Traitorous behavior, we'll say. Treason's a high accusation. Okay, so then what is the other side? If you're making the best steelman case argument that he is a PsyOp and a Trojan horse, then I would say something like this. Well, the cat was already out of the bag. YouTube was a thing. Facebook news was a thing. People are sharing their ideas on what's going on in America, and the sentiment is not very good. Conspiracy theories are abounding online. People are getting millions of followers like Alex Jones, There's all this independent media space popping up. Joe Rogan is out there having really interesting people on his podcast all the time. Tinfoil hats out there manning the fucking machine gun, still holding down their front, There's a whole bunch. The higher side chats. There's a whole bunch of independent media that's popping up at this time. And the American people are starting to see the cracks in our beautiful empire. We're starting to see the evil shining through. We're starting to see that there was no difference between Republicans and Democrats through the Clinton-Bushama era. The cracks are starting to show. That cat's out of the bag. The beans have been spilled. And if you are the deep state lizards and the beans have been spilled and the American people are going to find out soon and the jig will soon be up, then what you need to do is get out ahead of that. You need to give the people what they feel is a solution. You need to give the people what they feel as a savior coming in to fix all the problems that they're now acknowledging with all themselves. And so what you would need that guy to do is to come out and say exactly what everybody's thinking. Hey, we've been fucked over. The American people have been fucked over. This and that and this and that. And it's all their fault. It's the elite banking. It's this uniparty. It's Republicans and Democrats. It's the globalists. The globalists. They're trying to globalize everything. It's the war machine. So Donald Trump was that answer, and it placated us all and gave us hope that things were going to change. And while we were all hoping for the change and getting behind him, they also divided up the battle lines and made the country 50-50 on loving him and hating him. So while all the people who were paying attention for a long time get behind the Donald Trump thing, the people who have never been paying attention now have enemies. And the country all fights amongst itself instead of fixing these problems that we were all becoming immensely aware of up until 2016. And we all think we've got a solution. We're getting behind this solution. Donald Trump is saying all of the right things to somebody who's been paying attention and understands the real issues of the world. He's saying all the right things. He's continuing to let the cat all the way out of the bag. Get gone, kitty. Free range, cat. No more bag for you. But still, we're kind of stagnant on solutions. Still, that first term, didn't really net a whole lot. Big Pharma won really big. Some of the military contractors won pretty big. Also, a lot of manufacturing, blue-collar workers in Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, some places in the South too, I believe, Texas. A lot of manufacturing jobs came back. The economy did look pretty good there for a minute. And we didn't start any new wars. I don't know if that was in the budget. You see what I mean? There's kind of a good case to make for both sides. Now, I don't know which one of those sounds better to you, but maybe this will help. Because that's the best case for both. Now, let's talk about what doesn't make sense about either of those, right? Because if Trump is the savior, what has to be true, or I don't want to say it that way. This category savior, this isn't me saying I think he is an abject or an objective savior. I think what I'm saying is that his intentions are pure. And people can have pure intentions and fuck up along the way, and we kind of just forgive people for doing that because they're humans, And if we're saying that, then we have to believe that this uniparty thing really, really does control a lot. And I don't know, that's not a whole lot for me to wrap my head around, right? But what I do have to wrap my head around and what I have to make sense of is if Trump is a Trojan horse, a psychological operation put on by the uniparty to distract us all, divide us all, and move us continually into their direction while placating us and keeping us from rebelling or having a real referendum. If that is true, which it sounds so enticing to me, I'm a very conspiratorial-minded person. I've been a conspiracy theorist for more than a decade, coming from a time where people literally stopped being my friend because I had some of these opinions. And now they're the very same people, since it's trendy, that they'll post something about JFK or about MK Ultra. It's so hilarious. It's so hilarious. It's hilarious, and it is the worst also, catching on to things early. You never want to be too early to a trend. But anyway, a bunch of these people are coming around now. And I want to believe this because it kind of bolsters my conspiratorial worldview. But I think that worldview might be partially rooted in something in my brain that wants me to not have control over what's going on, so that I can abdicate myself of responsibility and not get involved in the system. And I can just be like, well, I'm just going to complain about it. There's no changing it anyway. I fuck it all and cynical. That cynical mindset keeps you from having to actually do anything about it. So I don't know. I like conspiracies. There's that lazy part of me that doesn't want to accept the responsibility that I'm responsible just as much as anybody else for the way things are going in America. And if I believe that, I have to do something about it. Anyway, I want to believe this conspiracy thing, but if we're being honest with ourselves, this one is so monumental. Let's just think about the hatred and the vitriol and think about how that could be staged. Think about how a uniparty, a government, the deep state, the lizards, how could they orchestrate this mass theater in which Republicans and Democrats of the establishment, the elite, the old guard, both hate Donald Trump. And not just hate him, they say some awful things about him. Like, say awful things about his family, say awful things about him, dig up all kinds of dirt. They pay to make steal dossiers. They pay people to come out and make false accusations. They orchestrate all this lawfare against the man, and then they shoot him. And then they shoot him in the ear. And then they shoot him in the ear. And he loses the 2020 election, the January 6th debacle. I mean, what do you make of all that? That is crazy theater, if it's theater. And I'm not ruling it out completely. I guess we've got acting schools and acting coaches, and I guess all the world is a stage, and politicians are often sociopaths, and sociopaths are often really good actors because, they don't know who they are. So that could be anybody. You see what I mean? But I guess it's not impossible, but it just seems like such a monumental thing to fake all the vitriol and hate, to stage all the lawfare, to come mere millimeters away from blowing the man's head off and putting a hole through his ear. I shoot a lot. That's not an easy thing to stage. I don't know anybody that's confident enough or good enough to make a shot with an AR-15 on a windy day with iron sights and nick somebody's ear. Maybe if it was staged, the plan was just to not hit him at all and shoot over his head and then just like he shot at the president. But then that doesn't have the same gravitas as the picture with the blood and the fight. I mean, a lot of people say that's what won him the election. So like, is the theater really worth anything if you don't put the hole through his ear? And can you even plan that? Because a 5.56 bullet is very small. It's like the wind moves it around a little bit on a windy day. It seems like a lot to fake. It seems like a lot to fake. All the hatred, all the vitriol, and being hated by all the right people. Now, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. People say that often, but people who are sharks and manipulators know that most people operate that way, so they can stage the situation to make this sort of thing. Like, just because the right people hate Donald Trump doesn't mean that I'm going to love Donald Trump because I hate the Bushes, Clintons, and Obamas. You know what I mean? That's an easy thing to manipulate. So you can't just jump into that. Well, all the right people hate him. But they also don't just hate him at a surface level. It seems like they're really going out of their way, like Republicans and Democrats. The old establishment elite going out of their way. And so I think here is my conclusion. I think my conclusion is this. If Trump is a psychological operation, Trojan horse, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. I'm actually kind of happy about it if he is. Why? Well, because if our government can pull something like that off and have 95% of the country convinced that he's either Satan or the savior, and only this tiny little people over here considering the possibility that he's a PsyOp, if they are able to pull that off, I feel like we're in good hands. I feel like we're going to win whatever conflict or whatever comes down the road. We're going to win whatever technological race is coming on. We're going to win the psychological warfare race abroad. I mean, holy shit. This is like monumental at the level if like Vince McMahon made wrestling real again in the minds of all of us without actually making it real, of course. Like there was one point where wrestling was real. As real as shit. It was real to everybody. It was viscerally real. And then there was one day everybody woke up and wrestling was fake. And everybody knows it's fake and not real wrestling now. But it's kind of like coming back on the upswing and people still like it even though it's like, okay, we know it's theater. But imagine if Vince McMahon somehow convinced everybody that they had changed the WWE. It was going to be real. People were really going to get hit over the head with chairs. People were really going to like get elbow dropped from the top rope. Cage matches were going to be real. And everybody believed it, but it still wasn't real. Like, that's so monumental. You have to trick everybody else and essentially make people go backwards in their understanding of something. It's such a monumental trick to play that if that is the trick and that really is what's going on, I'm confident in our government. They're way more capable than I thought they were. I thought incompetency was throughout the government. I thought that there was a big stack of evidence to say that the government doesn't really run very efficiently and it's not very competent and that it's often at odds with each other and can't really get anything done very well. You know what I mean? I thought the government was terribly inefficiency and bloated and couldn't really find their ass with both hands. But that might not be true. They might be highly capable and able to trick all of us. And if they are, I'm cool with it. I'm cool with it. But I think in reality, where the truth lies is that Trump is a very imperfect person, maybe even close to net neutral, but he's not evil in the sense and in the same way that Clint Abu Shama was, that ancient demon. He's not that. I think he's well-intentioned and maybe a little arrogant and maybe a little bit ignorant of what it actually took to do it. And maybe that was more valid for the first term than it is the second term. But either way, I don't know. There's something there. I think he's a well-intentioned, imperfect, anti-hero, maybe like that reluctant hero kind of person. Like, I don't want to compare him to Batman, but, the cops and the mayor and the city weren't all on board with Batman. Some people loved it, but other people were like, we can't have a vigilante stepping on here. We got to leave it to the authority, and there's due process, and blah, 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 blah. It's like, it might not be the hero we want, but maybe the hero we need, the only one that was willing to step up to the job, maybe the only one crazy enough and arrogant enough to think he could take on these people and lose a bunch of wealth, have his family threatened, have his own life nearly taken. So I think well-intentioned. And if there's any part of this that is a PsyOp, it is a well-intentioned, bombastic, kind of maybe a little ignorant the first time around person who's really good at running companies and really good at real estate deals and making deals and negotiating. But that hubris led him to making some terrible decisions. And this is where the PsyOp gets in, because the lizard deep state folks know Donald Trump's character. And some of them are probably really good at getting in and influencing people like that, probably because they know people like that all over the world and have done deals with people like that all over the world. So if there's any PsyOp, it's, from my best guess, and I'm about 75 to 80% sure that this is true, but it's somewhere in this gradient, that Trump was a reluctant but much needed, mixed bag, imperfect human who stepped into the role to try to right the wrongs and put America back on the right path for the American worker and not for the elites anymore. However, in his hubris and arrogance, let the deep state and the lizards turn parts of his campaign into a PsyOp of sorts, into a psychological operation that's meant to divide us further. I think if we're being honest, that's where the truth lies. And it's kind of complex and gray, and it's a big old piece of the pie chart, and it could be anywhere in there, but I think that's about as close as I will be able to get without being able to read minds and with the information that we have today. But also, this is a day-by-day sort of thing. We're getting new information on who Donald Trump is and what his real intentions are every day. So pay attention, stick with it. If things go bad in the country, it's kind of on us. We should have been paying attention a lot longer ago. Politics shouldn't be this dumb, nerdy thing that it was before 2016. And now it shouldn't be pop culture in the way that TikTok and fucking lib girl Twitter is perpetuating it. There's a lot of people out there whose empathy is becoming weaponized. And that's why it's important for you as a free thinking individual to understand these arguments and be able to lay them out without having any malice and with having some compassion, because ultimately, it doesn't really matter. We're all going to die and we're not going to be here long. So don't ruin the whole experience for yourself by worrying about it too much. But concern is a good thing. Worry, not so much. Fear, not so much. But concern and awareness. That's all I'm fucking asking you to do, is have a little concern and awareness. And now I'm preaching. And that sounds so annoying, I'm sure. But I hope you liked this podcast. I really, really tried my best one. And I think the third time is going to be the charm. So this will probably be the one you see. All right, guys. Thanks for sticking with me. I love you very much, and I'll see you next time. Okay, before you go, just wanted to add one little thing, call this an addendum, because, I don't know, that sounded really definitive towards the end of that, and I just wanted to leave a couple things open because, there is kind of this Israel double standard going on between Israel and Ukraine. Of course, Zelensky got a dressing down in the White House, and Bibi Netanyahu quite hasn't gotten the same, but also, let's be honest, Ukraine has got more funding in this short period of time than Israel has gotten in its entire career, so there is that too. But then there's also this weird thing with Trump having bought the super yacht that Khashoggi guy or somebody related to one of the Khashoggis had, and it was a blackmail yacht with wired up like Epstein's house with cameras and microphones, meant to like do dirty things on and blackmail people. He also bought the hotel in New York that Hoover, the director of the FBI, I think the original director of the FBI, also had wired up for blackmail and whatnot. You know, there is that loose style Epstein connection. I don't know. But does that seem like the uniparty to come in and like is it a hostile takeover between like two subgroups of the same thing? You know, it like gets even more complex when you think about those kind of things. But there's a healthy amount of skepticism that is good for this. You know, does it make more sense as a PsyOp if Trump is a PsyOp for a different faction who is at war with the old guard, new world order globalist? Is that what we're talking about? Is it like faction against faction? I don't know. Also, did you know Trump's uncle was the guy who the government sent in to Nikola Tesla's workshop to get all of his shit after he died. And this was during the war because they thought he might have some secret Wunderweapon technology, or, you know, Nikola Tesla's up to all kinds of crazy stuff. And that was Trump's uncle that did that. So, I mean, who knows? Yeah, I didn't want to leave you with anything too definitive so you could rest easily or anything. Stay sharp out there.